Before the Second Vatican Council, there was a growing devotion to Our Lady of Fatima that featured Mary's Hour, and that occurred at 3 p.m. In 1948, as war clouds blackened the horizon and fear of new strife filled the hearts of men, the heartening promises of Fatima stood as the last hope of peace for faithful Catholics. Mary's Hour was scheduled for May 2, 1948, in the Los Angeles Archdiocese. It was conceived by local college students. The first Mary's Hour was a stirring demonstration of faith and devotion to Our Lady of Fatima. The hour included praying of the Rosary and the benediction of the Blessed Sacrament. During the first Mary's Hour, Catholics prayed for the intercession of the Blessed Mother for world peace. The celebration was held at 3 p.m. and was broadcast live on the radio. The event was held in the Hollywood Bowl, which was filled with about 30,000 faithful Catholics. It had generated so much enthusiasm that several thousand people were turned away because there wasn't any more room at the venue. The Mary's Hour of devotion was moved to a bigger venue in 1949. Mary's Hour was held at the Los Angeles Coliseum, and 65,000 Catholics showed up. Can you imagine that many people showing up for a diocesan event nowadays? The Novus Ordo churches manage some large crowds for an appearance by the Pope, but can you imagine getting 65,000 Catholics together to pray the Rosary? The second Mary's Hour was held on May 1st, which is May Day, and it demonstrated the prayerful contrast to the defiant May Day rallies held by communists. The hour, of course, began at 3 p.m., which is Mary's Hour. The devotion started to spread to other areas of the nation, including New York, Chicago, and Detroit. In 1950, Mary's Hour was scheduled again for 3 p.m., since 3 p.m. is Mary's Hour. Believe it or not, 72,521 people participated in 1950, making it an even greater attendance record than the one in the prior year. Here's a photo of people filling the stands of the Los Angeles Coliseum. Again, the purpose of the gathering was to pray for the fulfillment of promises which were made by Our Lady of Fatima. A Mary's Hour ceremony was also scheduled for 3 o'clock in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Preceding the Mary's Hour in 1951, there was a parade of Catholic organizations in downtown Los Angeles. As always, the devotional program was scheduled for 3 p.m., which is Mary's Hour. It was again held in the Los Angeles Coliseum, and 75,000 people came, and it marked another new attendance record. Here's a photo of the Living Rosary on the field inside the stadium. The 1952 service again included a Living Rosary, and again it was scheduled for 3 p.m., Mary's Hour. Another new attendance record was set. This time, 80,000 Catholics joined in a brilliant hour of prayer for world peace and the conversion of Russia. In 1953, Mary's Hour was again scheduled for 3 p.m. at the Los Angeles Coliseum, and again its purpose was to pray for the conversion of Russia and the coming peace. Attendance in 1953 was 60,000 people. Cardinal Francis McIntyre presided over Mary's Hour in 1954 in Los Angeles as he had done in prior years. Here's a photo where he is accompanied by the Knights of Columbus. In 1954, Mary's Hour provided a contrast to communism, which by its nature is a crusade of materialism. As always, Mary's Hour was scheduled at 3 p.m. In 1954, an attendance record with an astonishing 110,000 Catholics filled up the Coliseum well beyond its stated capacity of 75,000. Some parishes were celebrating their own Mary's Hour at 3 p.m. In Chicago, the ambitious Bernard J. Shield must have seen that Mary's Hour could be a good thing to propel his career, so he became the principal speaker at a similar event. No doubt, Bishop Shield's speech mashed up Catholic and socialistic ideals. But fortunately, Mary's Hour survived even Bishop Shield. The original date for the Los Angeles Mary's Hour in 1955 was rained out, so Mary's Hour was rescheduled to the following week. Because of the rescheduling, attendance was just about half of what it had been in 1954. A Mary's Hour devotion was again held in the Chicago Archdiocese. In 1956, Mary's Hour was scheduled for 3 p.m. in the Los Angeles Coliseum, as it had been in prior years. The program featured a living rosary, and there were almost 80,000 Catholics praying the rosary at the event. The Los Angeles City Council proclaimed Sunday, May 5, 1957, from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. as Mary's Hour. 70,000 Catholics came to the Coliseum to pray for the conversion of Russia. Catholics prayed to the Blessed Mother and her Son for a peace that the world itself could not give. The 1958 devotion honoring the Blessed Mother was scheduled at 3 o'clock in the Coliseum, as usual. 60,000 devout Catholics observed Mary's Hour, and they prayed the Rosary, since that was always considered a good and profitable prayer for the 3 o'clock hour. The 1959 Mary's Hour was scheduled for 3 o'clock once again. In May of 1959, there was a new, liberal pope in the Vatican, who earlier in the year had announced his intention to call for a new council. Still, few, if any, people could anticipate what was on the horizon. Interestingly, the third secret of Fatima was expected to be released by the end of the year, so there must have been some great anticipation at that time. But the form of the devotion shifted from prayer to Our Lady of Fatima to prayer honoring the Blessed Mother under her title of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Mary's Hour still honored the Blessed Mother, and devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe is a good and profitable thing. But I do find the timing of this change in emphasis interesting. The death of Pope Pius XII didn't affect attendance much, as more than 75,000 people participated. The 1960 Mary's Hour gathering was again scheduled for 3 p.m., and attendance was still strong at 72,521 people. In 1961, the Los Angeles City Council passed another resolution declaring the following Sunday between 3 and 4 p.m. as Mary's Hour. Though at this time liberalism was infiltrating throughout the church, the Mary's Hour crowd heard that Catholics must block communism, and 71,164 were in attendance. The Second Vatican Council would convene later in October, but the annual Mary's Hour devotion was held as usual at 3 p.m. on May 6th. Attendance dipped, but 63,000 Catholics still attended in Los Angeles. A Mary's Hour program was also conducted at the University of San Diego's outdoor theater, with a very large crowd attending. The 1963 program in Los Angeles featured 6 Eastern Rite Catholic priests leading the crowd in a rosary. Nowadays, most Eastern Catholics don't pray the rosary, and they say that the Eastern Church stopped praying the rosary, and they dismiss it as a Latinization. And I submit to you that not saying the rosary is a result of the novelties of the Second Vatican Council. Many Eastern Catholics pretend that the Second Vatican Council didn't affect them very much, but unfortunately, they're dead wrong. Here we see the good Eastern Rite priests in the center of the field, and 61,178 Catholics prayed the rosary with them. And that's because the rosary is a good and profitable prayer for every Catholic. In 1964, the Los Angeles Mary's Hour was again scheduled for 3 p.m. And by then, Sacrosanctum Concilium had been promulgated, but the Novus Ordo Mass wouldn't fully be implemented until 1969. But elements of the Novus Ordo Mass would be added to the Latin Mass over a course of years through piecemeal innovations, and this was an extremely confusing time for Catholics. Not surprisingly, attendance at the Los Angeles program dipped once again to 51,000, and for the first time we see a photo of the Mary's Hour with empty seats. The 1965 gathering in Los Angeles was again held at 3 p.m. in the Coliseum, and attendance dropped again. This time the total was 48,803. However, that number would probably still be more than what they could have today if they tried to hold it now. By 1965, all reference and honor to the Blessed Mother under her title of Our Lady of Fatima had been abandoned. The emphasis of the 1965 event was on vocations, since the World Day of Prayer for Vocations, designated by Paul VI, came on the same day. Please note that there was a good reason that vocations had suddenly started to dry up at that time. Attendance at the 1966 event dropped once again, and this time only 43,000 people came. The theme of the 3 o'clock program in 1967 was Peace in Vietnam, and this is an astonishing development since Mary's Hour began as prayerful opposition to communism. Whether or not the war in Vietnam was a wise thing, by 1965 the Novus Ordo Church had transformed Mary's Hour into a rally to make peace and coexist with communists. As you might expect, attendance dropped once again, and only 35,000 people showed up for the peace prayer. By 1968, the sacred music at Mary's Hour was forgotten and replaced by folk guitars. Ecumenism even crept into Mary's Hour, and here we see that a Jewish folk singer named Sarah Hirschberg was a featured singer. Not surprisingly, attendance dropped again to 30,000 people. With attendance dropping every single year since 1959, for an entire decade, Mary's Hour was moved to a new venue, Dodger Stadium. Since the Novus Ordo Church didn't understand how it was ruining so many things in the Catholic Church, it's not surprising that it didn't understand how it had been ruining the Mary's Hour devotion. And this is evidenced by the fact in 1969 they took things one step further. They stopped calling it Mary's Hour. They rebranded it to Our Lady of Peace Day. About the only good thing that could be said about it was that it still began at 3 p.m. But, not surprisingly, attendance fell once again, and this time to 27,000 people. In 1970, the new Bishop of Los Angeles, Timothy Manning, who was known for counseling young men to become conscientious objectors during the war in Vietnam, put a halt to Mary's Hour. Evidently, he didn't see much need for it. There was no need to pray for an end to communism, since the church had been completely infiltrated by communists. So, the Novus Ordo Church halted devotion to Our Lady of Fatima and Mary's Hour at 3 p.m., and they replaced it with a prayer that was supposedly given to Sister Faustina in a vision. Faustina told gullible Catholics that all wishes would be granted to people who prayed her chaplet at 3 p.m. As we've discussed on this channel, Sister Faustina's visions very likely did not come from God. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back again within a week with another one. But in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page and my Twitter page. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel. And also, please pray for the church.